also turn down the music. I'm pretty sure none of you heard that. Hi, Chicky. Hi, Silver. Do you guys hear me well? I'm hoping that I have the settings good. Hi, guys. Welcome in. Oh, well then. I think I forgot to do something. Okay. Hi, Sprat. Welcome in. Forgot to do the coloring of an arm, but it's okay. We're gonna barely use that anyway. Anywho, thanks for the 50 stream streak, Silver. Thanks for always coming around. First one, but I am here for the vibes. I did download the VOD for the first one, Sprat. I still need to get it uploaded to YouTube, so that way if you guys ever want to, you know, go back to the first stories and stuff, you can if you're interested, because I really love this book series a lot. Alright, do you guys, is the music good? Is it not too high? Is it not too low? I also don't want to get drowned out. Also, I think my throat is doing pretty good for today, so I made sure I was like hydrating majority of the morning just for this, so. Alright, I got my book right here. I think for like the next ASMR book readings, I'm gonna try and get like very cozy sound toggles for you guys. I don't know if the rest of you feel the same way, but I always loved hearing the sound of a page turning, and I think that it would be perfect for this. As you guys also already know, whenever we hit a new chapter, I will always give you like a couple minutes breaks anytime anybody wants to go use the bathroom or get a drink or a snack, and then we'll continue reading. I should also probably set up a timer, but we'll do that next time. Alright, let me go ahead and get my book ready. Boom, magic book. Alright, we're gonna go ahead and start with chapter 6, I believe, is where we left off. Let me double check. Actually, I lied. We are on... I don't know why I felt like... Wait a minute. No. I think we are. Yes, I think this is chapter 6. Alright. Alright, we are starting at chapter 6. A girl with the pointy shoes. Let me get this page flip ready. The kitchen had changed since my last visit. A small fire had been made up in the grate, and 2 plates of bacon and eggs were on the table. There was a freshly baked loaf, too, and a large pat of butter. "Tuck in, lad, before it gets cold," invited the spook. I set it to immediately, and it didn't take us long to finish off both platefuls and eat half the loaf as well. Then the spook leaned back in his chair, tugged at his beard, and asked me an important question. "Don't you think," he asked, his eyes staring straight into mine, "that was the best plate of bacon and eggs you've ever tasted?" I didn't agree. The breakfast had been well cooked. It was good. All right. Better than cheese. But I tasted better. I tasted better every single morning when I'd lived at home. My mam was a far better cook, but somehow I didn't think that was the answer the spook was looking for. So I told a little white lie, the kind of untruth that doesn't really do any harm and tends to make people happier for hearing it. Yes, I said. It was the very first breakfast that I've ever tasted, and I'm sorry for coming down too early, and I promise that it won't happen again. At that, the spook grinned so much that I thought his face was going to split in two. Then he clapped me on the back and led me out into the garden again. It was only when we were outside that the grin finally faded. "Well done, lad," he said. "There are two things that respond well to flattery: boogarts and some women. Gets them every time." Well, I hadn't seen any sign of a woman in the kitchen, so it confirmed that of what I suspected, that a boogart cooked our meals. It was a surprise, to say the least. Everyone thought that a spook was a boogart slayer, or that he fixed them so they couldn't get up to any mischief. Who would have credited that he had one cooking and cleaning for him? "This is the western garden," the spook told me as we walked along the third path, the white pebbles crunching under our feet. "It's a safe place to be whether it's day or night. I often come here myself when I've got a problem that needs thinking through." We passed through another gap in the edge and were soon walking through the trees. I felt the difference right away. The birds were singing, and the trees were swaying slightly in the morning breeze. It was a happier place. We kept walking till we came out of the trees onto a hillside with a view of the fells to our right. The sky was so clear that I could see the dry stone walls that divided the lower slopes into fields and marked out each farmer's territory. In fact, the view extended right into the summits of the nearest fell. The spook gestured toward a wooden bench to our left. "Take a pew, lad," he invited. I did as I was told and sat down. For a few moments the spook stared down at me, his green eyes locked upon mine. Then he began to pace up and down in front of the bench without speaking. He was no longer looking at me, but stared into the space with a vacant expression in his eyes. He thrust back his long black cloak and put his hands in his breeches pockets. Then very suddenly he sat down beside me and asked questions. "How many different types of boogarts do you think there are?" I hadn't a clue. "I know 2 types already," I said. "The free and the bound, but I couldn't even begin to guess about the others." "That's good twice over, lad. You remembered what I taught you, and you've shown yourself to be someone who doesn't make wild guesses. You see, there are as many different types of boogarts as there are types of people, and each one has a personality of its own. Having said that, though, there are some types that can be recognized and given a name, sometimes on account of the shape they take, and sometimes because of their behavior and the tricks they get up to." He reached into his right pocket and pulled out a small book bound with black leather. Then he handed it to me. "Here, this is yours now," he said. "Take care of it, and whatever you do, don't lose it." The smell of leather was very strong, and the book appeared to be brand new. It was a bit of a disappointment to open it and find it's full of blank pages. I suppose I'd expected it to be full of the secrets of the spook's trade, but no. It seemed that I was expected to write them down, because next the spook pulled a pen and a small bottle of ink from his pockets. "Prepare to take notes," he said, standing up and beginning to pace back and forth in front of the bench again. "And be careful not to spill the ink, lad. It doesn't dribble from a cow's udder." I managed to uncork the bottle. Then very carefully I dipped the nib of the pen into it and opened the notebook at the first page. The spook had already begun the lesson, and he was talking very fast. "Firstly, there are hairy boogarts, which take the shape of animals. Most are dogs, but there are almost as many cats and the odd goat or two. But don't forget to include horses as well. They can be very tricky, and whatever their shape, hairy boogarts can be divided into those that are hostile, friendly, or somewhere between. Then there are the hall knockers, which sometimes develop into stone chuckers, which can get very angry when provoked. One of the nastiest types of all is the cattle ripper, because it's just as partial to human blood. But don't run away with the idea that we spooks just deal with boogarts, because the unquiet dead are very far away, or never very far away. Then to make things worse, witches are a real problem in the county. We don't have any local witches to worry about now, but to the east, near Pendle Hill, they're a real menace. And remember, not all witches are the same. They fall into 4 rough categories. The malevolent, I couldn't say that word very right. The benign, the falsely accused, and the unaware. By now, as you might have guessed, I was in real trouble. To begin with, he was talking so fast I hadn't managed to write down a single word. Secondly, I didn't even know all the big words he was using. However, just as he paused, I think he must have noticed the dazed expression on my face. "What's the problem, lad?" he asked. "Come on, spit it out. Don't be afraid to ask questions." "I didn't understand all that you said about witches," I said. "I don't know what malevolent means, or benign either." "Malevolent means evil," he explained. "Benign means good. And an unaware witch means a witch who doesn't know she's a witch. And because she's a woman, that makes her double trouble. Never trust a woman." That one kind of made me chuckle a little bit. "My mother's a woman," I said, suddenly feeling a little angry, "and I trust her." "Mothers usually are women," said the spook, "and mothers are usually quite trustworthy, as long as you're their son. Otherwise, look out. I had a mother once, and I trusted her, so I remember the feeling well." "Do you like girls?" he asked suddenly. "I don't really know any girls," I admitted. "I don't have any sisters." "Well, in that case, you can fall an easy victim to their tricks. So watch out for the village girls, especially any who wear pointy shoes. Jot that down. It's as good a place to start as anyway." I wondered what was so terrible about wearing pointy shoes. I knew my mom wouldn't be happy with what the spook had just said. She believed you should take people as you find them, not just depend on someone else's opinion. Still, what choice did I have? So at the top of the very first page, I wrote down, "Village girls with pointy shoes." He watched me write. Then he asked for the book and pen. "Look," he said. "You're going to have to take notes faster than that. There's a lot to learn, and you'll have filled a dozen notebooks before long. But for now, 3 or 4 headings will be enough to get you started." He then wrote "Hairy Boogarts" at the top of the page 2. Then "Hall Knockers" at the top of page 3. Then finally, "Witches" at the top of page 4. "There," he said. "That's got you started. Just write anything you learned today under one of those 4 headings, but now for something more urgent. We need provisions, so go down to the village, or we'll go hungry tomorrow. Even the best cook can't cook without provisions. Remember that everything goes inside my sack. The butcher has it, so go there first. Just ask for Mr. Gregory's order." He gave me a small silver coin, warning me not to lose my change, then sent me off down the hill on the quickest route to the village. Soon I was walking through the trees again, until at last I reached a stile that brought me into a steep and narrow lane. 100 or so paces lower, I turned a corner and the gray slates of Chippenden's rooftops came into view. The village was larger than I'd expected. There was at least 100 cottages, then a pub, a schoolhouse, and a big church with a bell tower. There was no sign of the market square, but the cobbled main street, which sloped quite steeply, was full of women with loaded baskets scurrying in out of the shops. Horses and carts were waiting on both sides of the street, so it was clear that the local farmers' wives came here to shop, and no doubt also folk from hamlets nearby. I found the butcher's shop without any trouble and joined a queue of boisterous women, all calling out to the butcher, a cheerful, big red-faced man with a ginger beard. He seemed to know every single one of them by name, and they kept laughing loudly at his jokes, which came thick and fast. I didn't understand most of them, but the women certainly did, and they really seemed to be enjoying themselves. Nobody paid me much attention, but at last I reached the counter, and it was my turn to be served. "I've called for Mr. Gregory's orders," I told the butcher. As soon as I'd spoken, the shop became quiet and the laughter stopped. The butcher reached behind the counter and pulled out a large sack. I could hear people whispering behind me, but even straining my ears, I couldn't quite catch what they were saying. When I glanced behind me, they were looking everywhere but at me. Some were even staring down at the floor. I gave the butcher the silver coin, checked my change carefully, thanked him, and carried the sack out of the shop, swinging it up onto my shoulder when I reached the street. The visit to the greengrocer's took no time at all. The provisions there were already wrapped, so I put the parcel in the sack, which was now starting to feel a bit heavy. Until then, everything had gone well, but as I went to the baker's, I saw the gang of lads. There were 7 or 8 of them sitting on a garden wall. Nothing odd about that, except for the fact that they weren't speaking to one another. They were all busy staring at me with hungry faces, like a pack of wolves, watching every step I took as I approached the baker's. When I came out of the shop, they were still there, and now, as I began the climb up the hill, they started following me. Well, although it was too much of a coincidence to think that they just decided to go up the same hill, I wasn't that worried. 6 brothers had given me plenty of practice at fighting. I heard the sound of their boots getting closer and closer. They were catching up with me pretty quickly, but maybe that was because I was walking slower and slower. You see, I didn't want them to think I was scared. And in any case, the sack was heavy and the hill I was climbing was very steep. They caught up with me about a dozen paces before the stile, just at the point where the lane divided a small wood, the trees crowding on either side to shut out the morning sun. "Open the sack and let's see what we've got," said a voice behind me. It was loud, deep voice accustomed to telling people what to do. There was a hard edge of danger that told me its owner liked to cause pain and was always looking for his next victim. I turned to face him, but gripped the sack even tighter, keeping it firmly on my shoulder. The one who spoken was the leader of the gang. There was no doubt about that. The rest of them had thin, pinched faces as if they were in need of a good meal, but he looked as if he'd been eating for all of them. He was at least a head taller than me, with broad shoulders and a neck like a bull's. His face was broad too, with red cheeks, but his eyes were very small, and he didn't seem to blink at all. I suppose if he hadn't been there and hadn't tried to bully me, I might have relented. After all, some of the boys looked half-starved, and there were a lot of apples and cakes in the sack. On the other hand, they weren't mine to give away. "This doesn't belong to me," I said. "It belongs to Mr. Gregory. His last apprentice didn't let that bother him," said the leader, moving his big face closer to mine. "He used to open the sack for us. If you've any sense, you'll do the same. If you won't do it the easy way, then it'll have to be the hard way. But you won't like that very much, and it'll all come down to the same thing in the end." The gang began to move closer. I could feel someone behind me tugging at the sack. Even then, I wouldn't let go, and I stared back into the piggy eyes of the leader, trying hard not to blink. At that moment, something happened that took us all by surprise. There was a movement in the trees somewhere to my right, and we all turned toward it. There was a dark shape in the shadows, and as my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw that it was a girl. She was moving slowly in our direction, but her approach was so silent that you could have heard a pin drop, and so smooth that she seemed to be floating rather than walking. Then she stopped just on the edge of the tree shadows, as if she didn't want to step into the sunlight. "Why don't you leave him be?" she demanded. It seemed like a question, but the tone in her voice told me it was a command. "What's it to you?" asked the leader of the gang, adjusting his chin forward and bunching his fists. "Ain't me you need to worry about," she answered from the shadows. "Lizzie's back, and if you don't do what I say, it's her you'll answer to." "Lizzie?" asked the lad, taking a step backward. "Bony Lizzie? She's my aunt. Don't tell me you ain't heard of her." Have you ever felt time slow so much that it almost appears to stop? Ever listened to a clock when the next tick seems to take forever to follow the last talk? Well, it was just like that until very suddenly the girl hissed loudly through her clenched teeth. Then she spoke again. "Go on," she said. "Be off with you. Be gone, be quick, or be dead." The effect on the gang was immediate. I glimpsed the expression on some of their faces and saw that they weren't just afraid. They were terrified and close to panic. Their leader turned on his heels and immediately fled down the hill, with the others close behind him. I didn't know why they were so scared, but I felt like running too. The girl was staring at me with wide eyes, and I didn't feel able to control my limbs properly. I felt like a mouse paralyzed by the stare of a stout about to pounce at any moment. I forced my left foot to move and slowly turned my body toward the trees to follow the direction my nose was pointing. But I was still gripping the spook's sack. Whoever she was, I still wasn't going to give it up. "Ain't you going to run as well?" she asked me. I shook my head, but my mouth was very dry, and I couldn't trust myself to try and speak. I knew the words would come out wrong. She was probably about my age, if anything, slightly younger. Her face was nice enough, for she had large brown eyes, high cheekbones, and long black hair. She wore a black dress tied tightly at the waist with a piece of white string. But as I took all this in, I suddenly noticed something that troubled me. The girl was wearing pointy shoes. And immediately I remembered the spook's warning. But I stood my ground, determined not to run like the others. "Ain't you going to thank me?" she asked. "Be nice to get some thanks." "Thanks," I said lamely, just managing to get the word out first time. "Well, that's a start," she said. "But to thank me properly, you need to give me something, don't you? A cake and an apple will do for now. It ain't much to ask. There's plenty in the sack, and old Gregory won't notice, and if he does, he won't say anything." I was shocked to hear her call the spook old Gregory. I knew he wouldn't like being called that, and it told me two things. First, the girl had little respect for him, and second, she wasn't the least bit afraid of him. back where I came from, most people shivered even at the thought that the spook might be in the neighborhood. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I can't do that. They're not mine to give." She glared at me hard then and didn't speak for a long time. I thought at one point that she was going to hiss at me through her teeth. I stared back at her, trying not to blink, until at last a faint smile lit up her face and she spoke again. "Then I'll have to settle for a promise." "A promise?" I asked, wondering what she meant. "A promise to help me just as I helped you. I don't need any help right now, but perhaps one day I might." "That's fine," I told her. "If you ever need any help in the future, then just ask." "What's your name?" she asked, giving me a really broad smile. "Tom Ward." "Well, my name's Alice, and I live yonder," she said, pointing back through the trees. "I'm Boney Lizzie's favorite niece." Boney Lizzie was a strange name, but it would have been rude to mention it. Whoever she was, her name had been enough to scare the village lads. That was the end of our conversation. We both turned then to go out our separate ways. But as we walked away, Alice called over her shoulder, "Take care now. You don't want to end up like old Gregory's last apprentice." "What happened to him?" I asked. "Better ask old Gregory," she shouted as she disappeared back into the trees. When I got back, the spook checked the contents of the sack carefully, ticking things off from a list. "Did you have any trouble down in the village?" he asked when he'd finally finished. "Some lads followed me up the hill and asked me to open the sack, but I told them no," I said. "That was very brave of you," said the spook. "Next time, it won't do any harm to let them have a few apples and cakes. Life's hard enough as it is, but some of them come from a very poor family. I always order extra in case they ask for some." I felt annoyed then. If only he had told me that in advance. "I didn't like to do it without asking you first," I said. The spook raised his eyebrows. "Did you want to give them a few apples and cakes?" "I don't like being bullied," I said. "But some of them did look really hungry." "Then next time, trust your instincts and use your initiative," said the spook. "Trust the voice inside you. It's rarely wrong. A spook depends a lot on that because it can sometimes mean the difference between life and death. So that's another thing we need to find out about you, whether or not your instincts can be relied on." He paused, staring at me hard, his green eyes searching my face. "Any trouble with girls?" he asked suddenly. It was because I was still annoyed that I didn't give a straight answer to his question. "No trouble at all," I answered. It wasn't a lie because Alice had helped me, which was the opposite of trouble. Still, I knew he really meant had I met any girls, and I knew I should have told him about her, especially with her wearing pointy shoes. I made lots of mistakes as an apprentice, and that was my second serious one, not telling the spook the whole truth. The first, even more serious one was making the promise to Alice. And that concludes chapter 6. Alright guys, we finished up chapter 6. I don't know if anyone may have passed out or not, but this is your time to get a drink and a snack or go to the bathroom. We're just going to take maybe a minute or two of a break before we continue to chapter 7. And it gives me time to go and check on things too. Alright. We're gonna go ahead and continue to chapter 7. Chapter 7. Someone has to do it. After that, my life settled into a busy routine. The spook taught me fast and made me write until my wrist ached and my eyes stung. One afternoon, he took me to the far end of the village, beyond the last stone cottage, to a small circle of willow trees, which are cold, withy trees in the county. It was a gloomy spot, and there, hanging from a branch, was a rope. I looked up and saw a big brass bell. "When people need help," said the spook, "they don't come up to the house. Nobody comes unless they're invited. I'm strict about that. They come down here and ring that bell. Then we go to them." The trouble was that even after weeks had gone by, nobody came to ring the bell, and I only ever got to go farther than the western garden when it was time to fetch the weekly provisions from the village. I was lonely too, missing my family, so it was a good job the spook kept me busy. That meant I didn't have time to dwell on it. I always went to bed tired and fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. The lessons were the most interesting part of each day, but I didn't learn much about gas, ghosts, and witches. The spook had told me that the main topic in an apprentice's first year was boogarts, together with such subjects as botany, which meant learning all about plants, some of which were really useful as medicines or could be eaten if you had no other food. But my lessons weren't just writing. Some of the work was just as hard and physical as anything I've done back home on the farm. It started on a warm, sunny morning when the spook told me to put away my notebook and led the way toward his southern garden. He gave me 2 things to carry, a spade and a long measuring rod. "Free boogarts travel down lays," he explained, "but sometimes something goes wrong. It can be the result of a storm or maybe even an earthquake. In the county there hasn't been a serious earthquake in living memory, but that doesn't matter, because lays are all interconnected, and something happening to one, even 1,000 miles away, can disturb all the others. Then boogarts get stuck in the same place for years, and we call them naturally bound. Often they can't move more than a few dozen paces in any direction, and they can cause little trouble, not unless you happen to get too close to one. Sometimes, though, they can be stuck in awkward places, close to a house or even inside one. Then you might need to move the boogarts from there and artificially bind it elsewhere." "What's a lay?" I asked. "Not everybody agrees, lad," he told me. "Some think they're just ancient paths that crisscross the land. The paths of our forefathers walked in ancient times when men were real men and darkness knew its place. Health was better, lives were longer, and everyone was happy and content." "What happened?" "Ice moved down from the north, and the earth grew cold for thousands of years." Yeesh. The spook explained. "It was so difficult to survive that men forgot everything they've learned. The old knowledge was unimportant. Keeping warm and eating was all that mattered. When the ice finally pulled back, the survivors were hunters dressed in animal skins. They'd forgotten how to grow crops and husband animals. Darkness was all powerful. Well, it's better now, although we still have a long way to go. All that's left are those times are the lays. But the truth is, they're more than just paths. Lays are really lines of power far beneath the earth. Secret invisible roads that free boogarts can use to travel to great speed. It's these free boogarts that cause the most trouble. When they set up home in a new location, often they're not welcome. Not being welcome makes them angry. They play tricks, sometimes dangerous tricks, and that means works for us. Then they need to be artificially bound in a pit, just like the one that you're going to dig now. This is a good place, he said, pointing at the ground near a big ancient oak tree. I think there should be enough space between the roots. The spook gave me a measuring rod so that I could make the pit exactly 6 feet long, 6 feet deep, and 3 feet wide. Even in the shade, it was too warm to be digging, and it took me hours and hours to get it right because the spook was the perfectionist. After digging the pit, I had to prepare a smelly mixture of salt, iron fillings, and a special sort of glue made from bones. Salt can burn a boogart, said the spook. Iron, on the other hand, earth stings. Just as lightning finds its way to earth and loses its power, iron can sometimes bleed away the strength and the substance of things that haunt the dark. It can end the mischief of troublesome boogarts. Used together, salt and iron form a barrier that a boogart can't cross. In fact, salt and iron can be useful in a lot of situations. After stirring up the mixture in a big metal bucket, I used a large brush to line the inside of the pit. It was like painting, but hard work, and the coating had to be perfect in order to stop even the craftiest boogart from escaping. Do a thorough job, lad, the spook told me. A boogart can escape through a hole no bigger than a pinhead. Of course, as soon as the pit was completed to the spook's satisfaction, I had to fill it in and begin again. He had me digging 2 practice pits a week, which was hard, sweaty work and took up a lot of my time. It was a bit scary too, but I was working near pits that contained real boogarts, and even in daylight it was a creepy place. I noticed that the spook never went too far away, though, and he always seemed watchful and alert, telling me you could never take chances with boogarts even when they were bound. The spook also told me that I'd need to know every inch of the county, all its towns and villages, and the quickest route between any 2 points. The trouble was that although the spook said he had lots of maps upstairs in his library, it seemed I always had to do things the hard way. So he started me off by making me draw a map of my own. At its center was his house and gardens, and it had to include the village and the nearest of the fells. The idea was that it would gradually get bigger to include more and more of the surrounding countryside. But drawing wasn't my strong point, and as I said, the spook was a perfectionist, so the map took a long time to grow. It was only then that he started to show me his own maps, but he made me spend more time carefully folding them up afterward than actually studying them. I also began to keep a diary. The spook gave me another notebook for this, telling me for the upteenth time that I needed to record the past so that I could learn from it. I didn't write in it every day, though. Sometimes I was too tired, and sometimes my wrist was aching from all the scribbling at top speed in my other notebook while trying to keep up with what the spook said. Then one morning at breakfast, when I'd been staying with the spook for just 1 month, he asked, "What do you think so far, lad?" I wondered if he was talking about the breakfast. Perhaps there'd been a second course to make up for the bacon, which had been a bit burnt that morning, so I just shrugged. I didn't want to offend the boogart, which was probably listening. "Well, it's a hard job, and I wouldn't blame you for deciding to give it up now," he said. "After the first month's passed, I always give each new apprentice the chance to go home and think very carefully about whether he wants to carry on or not. Would you like to do the same?" I did my best not to seem too eager, but it couldn't keep the smile off my face. The trouble was, the more I smiled, the more miserable the spook looked. I got the feeling that he wanted me to stay, but I couldn't wait to be off. The thought of seeing my family again and getting to taste my mam's cooking seemed like a dream. I left for home within an hour. "You're a brave lad and your wits are sharp," he said to me at the gate. "You've passed your month's trial, so you can tell your dad that, if you want to carry on, I'll be visiting him in the autumn to collect my 10 guineas. You've the makings of a good apprentice, but it's up to you, lad. If you don't come back then, I'll know you've decided against it. Otherwise, I'll expect you back within the week. Then I'll give you 5 years training that'll make you almost as good at the job as I am." I set off for home with a light heart. You see, I didn't want to tell the spook, but the moment he'd given me the chance to go home and maybe never come back, I've already made up my mind to do just that. It was a terrible job. From what the spook had told me, apart from the loneliness, it was dangerous and terrifying. Nobody really cared whether you lived or died. They just wanted you to get rid of whatever was plaguing them, but didn't think for a second about what it might cost you. The spook had described how he'd once been half killed by a boogart. It had changed in a blink of an eye from a hall knocker to a stone chucker, and had nearly brained him with a rock as big as a blacksmith's fist. He said that he hadn't even been paid yet, but expected to get the money next spring. Well, next spring was a long time off, so what good was that? As I set off for home, it seemed to me that I'd be better off working on the farm. The trouble was, it was nearly 2 days' journey, and walking gave me a lot of time to think. I remember how bored I'd sometimes been on the farm. Could I really put up with working there for the rest of my life? Next, I started to think about what Mam would say. She'd been really set on me being the spook's apprentice, and if I stopped, I'd really let her down. So the hardest part would be telling her and watching her reaction. By nightfall on the first day of my journey home, I'd finished all the cheese the spook had given me for the trip. So the next day, I only stopped once, to bathe my feet in the stream, reaching home just before the evening milking. As I opened the gate to the yard, Dad was heading for the cowshed. When he saw me, his face lit up with a broad smile. I offered to help with the milking so we could talk, but he told me to go in right away and speak to my mam. "She's missed you, lad. You'll be a sight for sore eyes," patting me on the back. He went off to do his milking, but before I'd taken half a dozen paces, Jack came out in the barn and made straight for me. "What brings you back so soon?" he asked. He seemed a little bit cold. Well, to be honest, he was more cold than cool. His face was sort of twisted, as if he was trying to scowl and grin at the same time. "The spook sent me home for a few days. I've to make up my mind whether to carry on or not." "So what will you do?" "I'm going to talk to Mam about it." "No doubt you'll get your own way as usual," Jack said. By now, Jack was definitely scowling, and it made me feel that something had happened while I'd been away. Why else was he suddenly so unfriendly? Was it because he didn't want me coming home? "And I can't believe you took Dad's tinderbox," he said. "He gave it to me," I said. "He wanted me to have it. He offered it, but that didn't mean you had to take it. The trouble with you is that you only think about yourself. Think of poor Dad. He loved that tinderbox." I didn't say anything because I didn't want to get into an argument. I knew he was wrong. Dad had wanted to have the tinderbox. I was sure of it. While I'm back, I'll be able to help out, I said, trying to change the subject. If you really want to earn your keep, then feed the pigs, he called as he turned to walk away. It was a job neither of us liked much. They were big, hairy, smelly pigs, and always so hungry that it was never safe to turn your back on them. Despite what Jack had said, I was still glad to be home. As I crossed the yard, I glanced up at the house. Ma'am's climbing roses covered most of the wall at the back and always did well even though they faced north. Now they're just shooting, but by mid-June they'd be covered in red blossoms. The back door was always jamming because the house had once been struck by lightning. The door had caught fire and had been replaced, but the frame was still slightly warped, so I had to push hard to force it open. It was worth it, because the first thing I saw was Ma'am's smiling face. She was sitting in her old rocking chair in the far corner of the kitchen, a place where the setting sun couldn't reach. If the light was too bright, it hurt her eyes. Ma'am preferred winter to summer and night to day. She was glad to see me all right, and at first I tried to delay telling her I'd come home to stay. I put on a brave face and pretended to be happy, but she saw right through me. I could never hide anything from her. "What's wrong?" she asked. I shrugged and tried to smile, probably doing even worse than my brother at disguising my feelings. "Speak up," she said. "There's no point in keeping it bottled up." I didn't answer for a long time. The coughing is starting to come back because my throat's not used to this quite yet. Anyway, I didn't answer for a long time because I was trying to find a way to put it into words. The rhythm of Ma'am's rocking chair gradually slowed until at least it came to a complete halt. That was always a bad sign. I've passed my month's trial, and Mr. Gregory says it's up to me whether I carry on or not. "But I'm lonely, ma'am," I confessed at last. "It's just as bad as I expected. I've got no friends, nobody my own age to talk to. I feel so alone. I'd like to come back and work here." I could have said more. I told her how happy we used to be on the farm when all my brothers were living at home. I didn't. I knew that she missed them too. I thought she'd be sympathetic because of that, but I was wrong. There was a long pause before Ma'am spoke, and I could hear Ellie sweeping up in the next room singing softly to herself as she worked. "Lonely?" Ma'am asked, her voice full of anger rather than sympathy. "How can you be lonely? You've got yourself, haven't you? If you ever lose yourself, then you'll really be lonely. In the meantime, stop complaining. You're nearly a man now, and a man has to work. Ever since the world began, men have been doing jobs they didn't like. Why should it be any different for you? You're the seventh son of a seventh son, and this is the job you were born to do." "But Mr. Gregory's trained other apprentices," I blurted out. "One of them could come back and look after the county. Why does it have to be me?" "He's trained many, but precious few completed their time," Ma'am said. "And those that did aren't a patch on him. They're flawed or weak or cowardly. They walk a twisted path, taking money for accomplishing so little. So there's only you left now, son. You're the last chance, the last hope. Someone has to do it. Someone has to stand against the dark, and you're the only one who can." The chair began to rock again, slowly picking up speed. "Well, I'm glad that's settled. Do you want to wait for supper, or shall I put you some out as soon as it's ready?" Mom asked. I've had nothing to eat all day, ma'am, not even breakfast. Well, it's rabbit stew. That ought to cheer you up a bit. I sat at the kitchen table feeling as low and sad as I could ever remember while Mam bustled above the stove. The rabbit stew smelled delicious and my mouth began to water. Nobody was a better cook than my mam, and it was worth coming home, even for just a single meal. With a smile, Mam carried across a big steaming plate of stew and set it down before me. I'll go make up your room, she said. Now you're here, you might as well stay a couple days. I mumbled my thanks and wasted no time in starting. As soon as Mam went upstairs, Ellie came into the kitchen. Nice to see you back, Tom, she said with a smile. Then she looked down at my generous plate of food. Would you like some bread with that? Oof, I had to do a little cough again. Yes, please, I said. And Ellie buttered me 3 thick slices before sitting at the table opposite of me. I finished it all without once coming up for air, finally wiping my plate clean with the last big slice of freshly baked bread. Feel better now? I nodded and tried to smile, but I knew it hadn't worked properly because Ellie suddenly looked worried. I couldn't help overhearing what you told your ma'am, she said. I'm sure it's not as bad as all of that. It's just because the job's all new and strange. You'll soon get used to the work. Anyway, you don't have to go back right away. After a few days at home, you'll feel better, and you'll always be welcome here, even when the farm belongs to Jack. I don't think Jack's that pleased to see me. Why? What makes you say that? Ellie asked. He just didn't seem that friendly, that's all. I don't think he wants me here. Don't you worry about your big mean brother. I could sort him out easily enough. I smiled properly then, because it was true. As my mam once said, Ellie could twist Jack round her little finger. What's mainly bothering him is this, Ellie said, smoothing her hand down across her belly. My mother's sister died in childbirth, and our family still talks of it to this day. It's made Jack nervous, but I'm not bothered at all, because I couldn't be in a better place with your ma'am to look after me. She paused. But there's something else. Your new job worries him. He seemed happy enough about it before I went away, I said. He was doing that for you because you're his brother, and he cares about you. But the work a spook does frightens people. It makes them easy. Or it makes them uneasy. I suppose if you left right away, it would probably have been all right. But Jack said that on the day you left, you went straight up over the hill into the woods, and that since then the dogs have been uneasy. Now they won't even go into the north pasture. Jack thinks you've stirred something up. I suppose it all comes back to this, Ellie went on, patting her belly gently. He's just being protective, that's all. He's thinking of his family. But don't worry. It'll all sort itself out eventually. In the end, I stayed 3 days, trying to put on a brave face, but eventually I sensed it was time to go. Mam was the last person I saw before I left. We were all alone in the kitchen, and she gave my arm a squeeze and told me that she was proud of me. You're more than just 7 times 7, she said, smiling at me warmly. You're my son, and you have the strength to do what has to be done. I nodded in agreement because I wanted her to be happy, but the smile slipped from my face just as soon as I left the yard. I trudged back to the spook's house with my heart right down in my boots, feeling hurt and disappointed that Mam wouldn't have me back home. It rained all the way back to Chippenden, and when I arrived, I was cold, wet, and miserable. But as I reached the front gate, to my surprise, the latch lifted on its own and the gate swung open without me touching it. It was a sort of welcome and an encouragement to go in, something I thought was reserved only for the spook. I suppose I should have been pleased by that, but I wasn't. It just felt creepy. I knocked at the door 3 times before I finally noticed that the key was in the lock. As my knocking had brought no response, I turned the key, then eased the door open. I checked all the downstairs rooms but one. Then I called up the stairs. There was no answer, so I risked going into the kitchen. There was a fire blazing in the grate, and the table was set for one. At its center was a huge steaming hot pot. I was so hungry I helped myself, and I had almost polished off the lot when I saw the note under the salt shaker. Gone east, Pendle. It's witch trouble, so I'll be away for some time. Make yourself at home, but don't forget to pick up this week's provisions. As usual, the butcher has my sack, so go there first. Pendle was a big fell, almost a mountain really, far to the east of the county. That whole district was infested with witches and was a risky place to go, especially alone. It reminded me again of how dangerous the spook's job could be. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feeling a bit annoyed. All that time waiting for something to happen, then the moment I'm away, the spook goes off without me. I slept well that night, but not so deeply that I failed to hear the bell summoning me for breakfast. I went downstairs on time and was rewarded with the best plate of bacon and eggs I'd eaten in the spook's house. I was so pleased that just before leaving the table, I spoke out loud using the words that my dad said every Sunday after lunch. "That was really good," I said. "My compliments to the cook." No sooner had I spoken than the fire flared up in the grate and a cat began to purr. I couldn't see a cat, but the noise it was making was so loud that I'll swear the window panes were rattling. It was obvious that I said the right thing. So, feeling right pleased with myself, I set off for the village to pick up the provisions. The sun was shining out of a blue, cloudless sky. The birds were singing, and after the previous day's rain, the whole world seemed bright and gleaming and anew. I started at the butcher's, collected the spook's sack, moved on to the greengrocer's, and finished at the baker's. Some village lads were leaning against a wall nearby. There weren't as many as last time, and their leader, the big lad with the neck like a bull's, wasn't them. Remembering what the spook had said, I walked up straight to them. "I'm sorry about last time," I said, "but I am new and I didn't understand the rules properly. Mr. Gregory said that you can have an apple and a cake each." So saying, I opened the sack and handed each lad just what I'd promised. Their eyes opened so wide that they almost popped out of their sockets, and each muttered his thanks. At the top of the lane, someone was waiting for me. It was the girl called Alice, and once again she was standing in the shadow of the trees as if she didn't like the sunlight. "You can have an apple and a cake," I told her. To my surprise, she shook her head. "I'm not hungry at the moment," she said, "but there's something that I do want. I need you to keep your promise. I need some help." I shrugged. A promise is a promise, and I remembered making it. So what else could I do but keep my word? "Tell me what you want, and I'll do my best," I replied. Once more, her face lit up into a really broad smile. She wore a black dress and had pointy shoes, but that smile somehow made me forget all of that. Still, what she said next set me worrying and quite spoiled the rest of the day. "Ain't going to tell you now," she said. "Tell you this evening. I will just as the sun goes down. Come to me when you hear old Gregory's bell." I heard the bell just before sunset, and with a heavy heart went down the hill toward the circle of willow trees where the lanes crossed. It didn't seem right, her ringing the bell like that. Not unless she had worked for the spook, but somehow I doubted that. Far above, the last rays of the sun were bathing the summits of the fells in a faint orange glow, but down below, among the withy trees, it was gray and full of shadows. I shivered when I saw the girl, because she was pulling the rope with just one hand, yet making the clappers of the bell dance wildly. Despite her slim arms and narrow waist, she had to be very strong. She stopped ringing as soon as I showed my face and rested her hands on her hips, while the branches continued to dance and shake overhead. We just stared at each other for ages, until my eyes were drawn down toward a basket at her feet. There was something inside. It was covered with a black cloth. She lifted the basket and held it out to me. "What is it?" I asked. "It's for you, so that you can keep your promise." I accepted it, but it wasn't feeling very happy. Curious, I reached inside to lift the black cloth. "No, leave it be," Alice snapped, a sharp edge to her voice. "Don't let the air get to them or they'll spoil." "What are they?" I asked. It was growing darker by the minute, and I was starting to feel nervous. "They're just cakes." "Thank you very much," I said. "They're not for you," she said, a little smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Those cakes are for old Mother Malcolm." My mouth became dry, and a chill ran down my spine. Mother Malcolm, the live witch the spook kept in the pit of his garden. "I don't think Mr. Gregory would like it," I said. "He told me to keep away from her." "He's a very cruel man, old Gregory," said Alice. "Poor Mother Malcolm's been in that damp, dark hole in the ground for almost 13 years now. Is it right to treat an old woman so badly?" I shrugged. I hadn't been happy about it myself. It was hard to defend what he'd done, but he said there was a very good reason for it. "Look," she said, "you won't get into trouble because old Gregory need never know. It's just comfort you're bringing to her. Her favorite cakes made by family. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Just something to keep up her strength against the cold. Gets right into her bones, it does." Once again I shrugged. All the best arguments seemed to belong to her. "So just give her a cake each night. 3 cakes for 3 nights. Best do it at midnight, because it's then that she gets more peckish. Give her the first one tonight." Alice turned to go, but stopped and turned to give me a smile. "We could become good friends, you and me," she said with a chuckle. Then she disappeared into the deepening shadows. And that completes chapter 7. Alright. I don't know if anyone's probably passed out or anything, but this is a good time for everybody to get drinks, a snack, and a bathroom break real quick. For me personally, I need to go get some water, and when I come back, we'll continue. So I hope you guys enjoy the relaxing music, while I go get myself a cup of water real quick. Alright, I am back. Let me just get one more good sip of my water. That's some good stuff. Alright, guys. We're gonna go ahead and continue to chapter 8. Chapter 8, Old Mother Malkin. Back at the spook's cottage, I began to worry, but the more I thought about it, the less clear I was in my own mind. I knew what the spook would say. He'd throw the cakes away and give me a long lesson on witches and problems with girls wearing pointy shoes. He wasn't here, so I didn't enter into it. There were two things that made me go into the darkness of the Eastern Garden, where he kept the witches. The first was my promise to Alice. Never make a promise that you're not prepared to keep, my dad always told me. So I had a little choice. He taught me right from wrong, and just because I was the spook's apprentice, it didn't mean I had to change all my ways. Second, I didn't hold with keeping an old woman as a prisoner in a hole in the ground. Doing that to a dead witch seemed reasonable, but not to a live one. I remember wondering what terrible crime she committed to deserve that. What harm could it do just to give her 3 cakes? A bit of comfort from her family against a cold and damp, that's all it was. The spook had told me to trust my instincts, and after weighing things in the balance, I felt that I was doing the right thing. The only problem was that I had to take the cakes myself. At midnight. It gets pretty dark by then, especially there's no moon visible. I approached the Eastern Garden carrying the basket. It was dark, but not quite as dark as I expected. For one thing, My eyes have always been pretty sharp at night. My mam's good in the dark, and I think I get it from her side. And for another, it was a cloudless night, and the moonlight helped me pick out my way. As I entered the trees, it suddenly grew colder, and I shivered. By the time I reached the first grave, the one with the stone border and the 13 bars, I felt even colder. That was where the first witch was buried. She was feeble, with a little strength, or so the spook had said. No need to worry there, I told myself, trying hard to believe it. Making up my mind to give Mother Malkin the cakes in daylight was one thing, but now, down in the garden close to midnight, I was no longer so sure. The spook had told me to keep well away after dark. He warned me more than once, so it had to be an important rule, and now I was breaking it. There were all sorts of faint sounds. The rustling and the twitchings were probably nothing, just small creatures I disturbed moving out of my path, but they reminded me that I'd no right to be here. The spook had told me that the other two witches were about 20 paces farther on, so I counted out my steps carefully. That brought me to the second grave that was just like the first one. I got closer just to be sure. There were the bars, and you could see the earth just beneath them. Hard-packed soil without even a single blade of grass. This witch was dead, but was still dangerous. She was the one who had been buried head downward. That meant that the soles of her feet were somewhere just below the soil. As I stared at the grave, I thought of something moving. It was a sort of twitch. Probably just my imagination, or maybe some small animal. A mouse or a shrew or something. I moved on quickly. What if it had been a toe? 3 more paces brought me to the place I was looking for. There was no doubt about it. Again, there was a border of stones with 13 bars. There were 3 differences, though. First, the area under the bars was a square rather than an oblong. Second, it was bigger, probably about 4 paces by 4. Third, there was no packed earth under the bars, just a very black hole in the ground. I halted in my tracks and I listened carefully. There hadn't been much noise so far, just the faint rustlings of night creatures and a gentle breeze. A breeze so light that I hardly noticed it. I noticed it when it stopped, though suddenly everything was very still and the woods became unnaturally quiet. You see, I had been listening to try and hear the witch, and now I sensed that she was listening to me. The silence seemed to go on and on forever until suddenly I became aware of a faint breathing from the pit. That sound somehow made it possible to move, so I took a few more steps till I was standing very close to its edge, with the toe of my boot actually touching the stone border. At that moment, I remembered something the spook had told me about Mother Malkin. Most of her powers bled away into the earth. She'd love to get her hands on a lad like you. So I took a step backward, not too far, but the spook's word had set me thinking. What if a hand came out of the pit and grabbed my ankle? Wanting to get it over with, I called down gently into the darkness. Mother Malkin, I said, I brought something for you. As a present from your family. Are you there? Are you listening? There was no reply, but the rhythm of the breathing below seemed to quicken. So wasting no more time and desperate to get back to the warmth of the spook's house, I reached into the basket and felt under the cloth. My fingers closed upon one of the cakes. It felt sort of soft and squishy and a bit sticky. I pulled it out, held it over the bars. It's just a cake, I said softly. I hope it makes you feel better. I'll bring you another one tomorrow night. With those words, I let go of the cake and it allowed it to fall into the darkness. I should have gone back to the cottage immediately, but I stayed for a few more seconds to listen. I don't know what I expected to hear, but it was a mistake. There was a movement in the pit, as if something were dragging itself along the ground, and then I heard the witch began to eat the cake. I thought some of my brothers made unpleasant noises at the table, but this was far worse. It sounded even more revolting than our big hairy pigs with their snouts in the swill bucket. A mixture of snuffling, snorting, and chewing mixed with heavy breathing. I didn't know whether or not she was enjoying the cake, but she certainly made enough noise about it. That night, I found it very hard to sleep. I kept thinking about the dark pit and worrying about having to visit it again the following night. I only just made it down to breakfast on time, and the bacon was burnt and the bread a bit stale inside. I couldn't understand why this was. I brought the bread fresh from the baker's only the day before. Not only that, the milk was sour. Could it be because the boogart was angry with me? Did it know what I'd been up to? Had it spoiled the breakfast as some sort of warning? Working on a farm is hard, and that's what I was used to. The spook hadn't left me any tasks to do, so I had nothing to fill up my day with. Excuse me guys, as I get a drink of water. I did walk up to the library thinking that he probably wouldn't mind if I found myself something useful to read. But to my disappointment, the door was locked. So what could I do but go for a walk? I decided to explore the fells. First climbing Parlick Pike, at the summit I sat at a cairn of stones and admired the view. It was a clear, bright day, and from up there I could see the county spread out below me, with the distant sea an inviting twinkling blue way out to the northwest. The fells seemed to go on forever, great hills with names like Holder Fell and Steakhouse Fell, so many that it seemed it would take a lifetime to explore them. Nearby was Wolf Fell, and it made me wonder whether there actually were any wolves in the area. Wolves could be dangerous, and it was said that in winter, when the weather was cold, they sometimes hunted in packs. Well, it was spring now, and I certainly didn't see any sign of them. But that didn't... Thank you for the follow, Bloody. Thank you for the follow. I hope you enjoy your time here. It made me realize that being up on the fells after nightfall would be quite scary. Not as scary, I decided, as having to go and feed Mother Malkin another of the cakes, and all too soon the sun began to sink into the west, and I was forced to climb down toward Chippenden again. Once more I found myself carrying the basket through the darkness of the garden. This time I decided to get it over with quickly. Wasting no time, I dropped the second sticky cake through the bars into the black pit. It was only when it was too late, the very second it left my fingers, that I noticed something that sent a chill straight to my heart. The bars above the pit had been bent. Last night, they'd been perfectly straight. 13 parallel rods of iron. Now the center ones were almost wide enough to get a head through. They could have been bent by someone on the outside, above ground, but I doubted that. The spook had told me that the gardens in the house were guarded and that nobody could get in. He hadn't said how and by what, but I guessed it was the son of a Bogart. Perhaps the same one that made the meals. So it had to be the witch. She must have climbed up the side of the pit somehow and begun working at the bars. Suddenly the truth of what was happening dawned inside my head. one more sip of water. I'd been so stupid. The cakes were making her stronger. I heard her below in the darkness, starting to eat the second cake, making the same horrible chewing, snuffling, and snorting noises. I left the trees quickly and went back to the cottage. For all I knew, she might not even need the third one. Another sleepless night. I've made up my mind. I decided to go and see Alice, give her back the last cake, and explain to her why I couldn't keep my promise. First, I had to find her. Straight after breakfast, I went down to the woods where we'd first met and walked through to its far edge. Alice had said she lived yonder, but there was no sign of any buildings, just low hills and valleys and more woods in the distance. Thinking it would be faster to ask directions, I went down to the village. There were surprisingly few people about, but as I expected, some of the lads were hanging about near the baker's. It seemed to be their favorite spot. Perhaps they liked the smell. I know I did. Freshly baked bread has one of the best smells in all of the world. They weren't very friendly considering the last time we'd met. I'd given them a cake and an apple each. That was probably because this time the big lad with piggy eyes was with them. Still, they did listen to what I had to say. I didn't go into details, just told them I needed to find the girl we'd met in the edge of the wood. I know where she might be, said the big lad, scowling fiercely. But you'd be stupid to go there. Why is that? Didn't you hear what she said? He asked, raising his eyebrows. She said Bony Lizzie was her aunt. Who's Bony Lizzie? They looked at one another and shook their heads as if I was mad. Why was it that everyone seemed to have heard of her but me? Lizzie and her grandmother spent a whole winter here before Gregory sorted them out. My dad's always going on about them. They were just about the scariest witches you've ever been in these parts. They lived with something just as scary, though. It looked like a man, but it was really big, with too many teeth to fit in its mouth. That's what my dad told me. He said that back then, during that long winter, people never went out after dark. Some spook you'll be if you've never even heard of Bony Lizzie. I didn't like the sound of that one little bit. I realized I'd been really stupid. If only I told the spook about my talk with Alice, he'd have realized that Lizzie was back and would have done something about it. According to the big lad's dad, Bony Lizzie had lived on a farm about 3 miles southeast of the spook's place. It had been deserted for years, and nobody ever went there. So that was the most likely place she'd be staying now. That seemed about right to me, because it was in the direction that Alice had pointed. Just then, a group of grim-faced people came out of the church. Sorry guys, I saw a pop-up. I want to make sure we didn't lose connection. Okay. It looks like we're fine. Oops. Here we go. They turned the corner in a straggly line and headed up the hill toward the fells. The village priest in the lead. They were dressed in worn clothing, and many of them were carrying walking sticks. What's all of that about? I asked. A child went missing last night, answered one of the lads, spitting onto the cobbles. A 3-year-old. They think he's wandered off up there. Mind you, it's not the first. 2 days ago, a baby went missing from a farm over on the long ridge. It was too young to walk, so it must have been carried off. They think it could be wolves. It was a bad winter, and that sometimes brings them back. The directions I was given turned out to be pretty good. Even allowing for going back to pick up Alice's basket, it was less than an hour before Lizzie's house came into view. At that point, in the bright sunlight, I lifted the cloth and examined the last of the 3 cakes. It smelled bad, but looked even worse. It seemed to have been made from small pieces of meat and bread, plus other things that I couldn't identify. It was wet and very sticky, almost black. None of the ingredients had been cooked, but just sort of pressed together. Then I noticed something even more horrible. There were tiny white things crawling on the cake that looked like maggots. I shuddered, covered it up with a cloth, and went down the hill to the very neglected farm. Fences were broken, the barn was missing half its roof, and there was no sign of any animals. One thing did worry me, though. Smoke was coming from the farmhouse chimney. It meant that someone was at home, and I began to worry about the thing with too many teeth to fit in its mouth. What had I expected? It was going to be difficult. How on earth could I manage to talk to Alice without being seen by the other members of her family? As I halted on the slope trying to work out what to do next, my problem was solved for me. A slim, dark figure came out of the black door of the farmhouse and began to climb the hill in my direction. It was Alice. But how had she known I was here? There were trees between the farmhouse and me, and the windows were facing the wrong direction. Still, she wasn't coming up the hill by chance. She walked straight up toward me and halted about 5 paces away. "What do you want?" she asked. "You're stupid coming here. Lucky for you that those inside are asleep." "I can't do what you asked," I said, holding out the basket toward her. She folded her arms and frowned. "Why not?" she demanded. "You promised, didn't you?" "You didn't tell me what it would happen," I said. "She's eaten 2 cakes already, and they're making her stronger. She's already bent the bars over the pit. 1 more cake and she'll be free, and I think you know it." "Wasn't that the idea all along?" I accused, starting to feel angry. "You tricked me. So the promise doesn't count anymore." She took a step nearer, but now her own anger had been replaced by something else. Suddenly she looked scared. "It wasn't my idea. They made me do it," she said, gesturing down toward the farmhouse. "If you don't do as you promise, it'll go hard with both of us. Go on, give her the 3rd cake. What harm can it do? Mother Malkin's paid the price. It's time to let her go. Go on, give her the cake, and she'll be gone tonight and never trouble you again." "I think Mr. Gregory must have had a very good reason for putting her in that pit," I said slowly. "I'm just his new apprentice, so how can I know what's best? When he gets back, I'm going to tell him everything that's happened." Alice gave a little smile, the sort of smile someone gives when they know something that you don't. "He ain't coming back," she said. "Lizzie thought of it all. Got good friends near Pendle, Lizzie has. Do anything for her, they would. They tricked old Gregory. When he's on the road, he'll get what's coming to him. By now, he's probably already dead and 6 feet under. You just wait and see if I'm right. Soon you won't be safe even up there in his house. One night they'll come for you. Unless, of course, you help now. In that case, they might just leave you alone." As soon as she said that, I turned my back and climbed the hill, leaving her standing there. I think she called out to me several times, but I wasn't listening. What she said about the spook was spinning around inside my head. It was only later that I realized I was still carrying the basket, so I threw it and the last of the cakes into a river. Then back at the spook's cottage, it didn't take me very long to work out what had happened and decided what to do next. The whole thing had been planned from the start. They lured the spook away knowing that as a new apprentice, I'd still be wet behind the ears and easy to trick. I didn't believe that the spook would be so easy to kill, or he wouldn't have survived for so many years. But I couldn't rely on him arriving back in time to help me. Somehow I had to stop Mother Malcolm before getting out of the pit. I needed help badly, and I thought I was going down to the village, but I knew there was more special kind of help near at hand. So I went into the kitchen and sat at the table. At any moment I expected to have my ears boxed, so I talked quickly. I explained everything that had happened, leaving nothing out. Then I said that it was my fault, and could I please be given some help? I didn't know what I expected. I didn't feel foolish talking into the empty air, because I was so upset and frightened. But as the silence lengthened, I gradually realized that I'd been wasting my time. Why would the Boogart help me? For all I knew, it was a prisoner, bound to the house and guarded by the spook. It might have just been a slave desperate to be free. It might even be happy because I was in trouble. Just when I was about to give up and leave the kitchen, I remembered something my dad often said before we went off to the local market. Everyone has his price. It's just a case of making an offer that pleases him, but doesn't hurt you too much. Hi, Mari. Welcome in. Welcome in. And I hope you enjoy your time getting cozy. So I made the Boogart an offer. If you help me now, I won't forget it, I said. When I become the next spook, I'll give you every Sunday off. On that day, I'll make my own meals so that you can have a rest and please yourself what you do. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my legs under the table. I did one check-in my silent voice. There was a noise, too. Oh, the music seemed to have changed. Let me see if I could... Well, this is a lot more pleasing. There we go. Thank you for the 10 stream streak, Mari. Thank you for always supporting me. Suddenly I felt something brush against my legs under the table. There was a noise, too, a faint purring, and a big ginger cat strolled into view and moved slowly toward the door. It must have been under the table all the time. That's what common sense told me. I knew different, though. So I followed the cat out into the hallway and then up the stairs, where it halted outside the locked door of the library. Then it rubbed its back against it, the way cats do against table legs. The door slowly swung open to reveal more books than anyone could ever have read in one lifetime. Arranged neatly on rows of parallel racks of the shelves, I stepped inside wondering where to begin. And when I turned around again, the big ginger cat had vanished. Each book had its title neatly displayed on the cover. A lot were written in Latin, and quite a few in Greek. There was no dust or cobwebs. The library was just as clean and well cared for as the kitchen. I walked along the first row until something caught my eye. Near the window, there were 3 very long shelves full of leather-bound notebooks, just like the one the spook had given me. But the top shelf had larger books with dates on the covers. Each one seemed to record a period of 5 years, so I picked up the one at the end of the shelf and opened it carefully. I recognized the spook's handwriting. Flicking through the pages, I realized that it was a sort of diary, It recorded each job he'd done, the time taken in traveling, and the amount he'd been paid. Most importantly, it explained just how each boogart, ghost, and witch had been dealt with. I put the book back on the shelf and glanced along the other spines. The diaries extended almost up to the present day, but went back hundreds of years. Either the spook was a lot older than he looked, or the earlier books had been written by other spooks who'd lived ages ago. I suddenly wondered whether, even if Alice was right and the spook didn't come back, there was a possibility that I might be able to learn all I needed to know just by studying those diaries. Better still, somewhere in those thousands upon thousands of pages, there might be information that would help me now. How could I find it? Will I make it in time? But the witch had been in the pit for almost 13 years. There had to be an account of how the spook had put her there. Then suddenly, on a lower shelf, I saw something even better. There were even bigger books, each dedicated to a particular topic. One was labeled Dragons and Worms. As they were displayed in alphabetical order, it didn't take me long to find just what I was looking for. Witches. I opened it with trembling hands to find it was divided into 4 predictable sections: the malevolent, the benign, the falsely accused, and the unaware. I quickly turned to the first section. Everything was in the spook's neat handwriting, and once again, carefully organized into alphabetical order. Within seconds, I found the page titled Mother Malkin. Jesus. It was worse than I expected. Mother Malkin was just about as evil as you could imagine. She lived in lots of places. In each area she stayed, something terrible had happened. The worst thing of all occurring on a moss to the west of the county. She lived on a farm there, offering a place to stay to young women who were expecting babies but had no husbands to support them. That was where she had gotten the title, Mother. This had gone on for years, but some of the young women had never been seen again. She had a son of her own living with her there, a young man of incredible strength called Tusk. He had big teeth and frightened people so much that nobody ever went near the place. But at last the locals had roused themselves, and Mother Malkin had been forced to flee to Pendle. After she'd gone, they found the first of the graves. There was a whole field of bones and rotting flesh, mainly the remains of children she'd murdered to supply her need for blood. Some of the bodies were those of women. In each case, the body had been crushed, the ribs broken and cracked. The lads in the village had talked about a thing with too many teeth to fit in its mouth. Could that be Tusk, Mother Malkin's son? A son who'd probably killed those women by crushing the life out of them. That set my hands trembling, so much I could hardly hold the book steady enough to read it. It seemed that some witches used bone magic. They were necromancers, who got their power by summoning the dead. But Mother Malkin was even worse. Mother Malkin used blood magic. She got her power by using human blood and was particularly fond of blood of children. I thought of the black sticky cakes and shuddered. A child had gone missing from the Long Ridge, a child too young to walk. Had it been snatched by Bony Lizzie? Had its blood been used to make those cakes? And what about the second child? The one the villagers were searching for? What if Bony Lizzie had snatched that one too, ready for when Mother Malkin escaped? from her pit so that she could use its blood to work her magic. The child might be in Lizzie's house now. I forced myself to go on reading. 13 years ago, early in the winter, Mother Malkin had come to live in Chippenden, bringing her granddaughter, Bony Lizzie, with her. When the spook had come back from his winter house in Anglesark, he'd wasted no time in dealing with her. After driving off Bony Lizzie, he bound Mother Malkin with a silver chain and carried her back to the pit in his garden. The spook seemed to be arguing with himself in the account. He clearly didn't like burying her alive, but explained why he had to do it. He believed that it was too dangerous to kill her. Once slain, she'd had the power to return and would be even stronger and more dangerous than before. The point was, could she still escape? One cake and she'd been able to bend the bars. Although she wouldn't get the third, 2 might just be enough. At midnight, she might still climb out of the pit. What could I do? If you could bind a witch with a silver chain, then it might have been worth trying to fasten one across the top of the bent bars to stop her from climbing out of her pit. The trouble was, the spook's silver chain was in his bag, which always traveled with him. I saw something else as I left that library. It was beside the door, so I hadn't noticed it as I came in. It was a long list of names on a yellow paper, exactly 30, and all written in the spook's own handwriting. My own name, Thomas J. Ward, was at the very bottom, and directly above it was the name William Bradley, which had been crossed out with a horizontal line. Next to it were the letters R.I.P. I felt cold all over then, because I knew they meant rest in peace and that Billy Bradley had died. More than 2/3 of the names on the paper had been crossed off. Of those 9, besides Billy, were dead. I suppose that a lot were crossed out simply because they failed to make the grade as apprentices, perhaps not even making it to the end of the first month. Those who had died were more worrying. I wondered what had happened to Billy Bradley, and I remembered what Alice had said. You don't want to end up like old Gregory's last apprentice. How did Alice know what had happened to Billy? It was probably just that everybody in the locality knew about it, while I was an outsider. Or had her family had something to do with it? I hope not, but it gave me something else to worry about. Wasting no more time, I went down to the village. The butcher seemed to have gotten some contact with the spook. How else had he gotten the sack to put the meat into? So I decided to tell him about my suspicions and tried to persuade him to search Lizzie's house for the missing child. It was late in the afternoon when I arrived at his shop, and it was closed. I knocked on the doors of 5 cottages before anyone came to answer. They confirmed what I already suspected. The butcher had gone off with the other men to search the fells. They wouldn't be back until noon the following day. It seemed that after searching the local fells, they were going to cross the valley to the village at the foot of the long ridge where the first child had gone missing. There they carried out a wider search and stay overnight. I had to face it. I was on my own. Soon both sad and afraid, I was climbing the lane back toward the spook's house. I knew that if Mother Malkin got out of her grave, then the child would be dead before morning. I knew also that I was the only one who might even try to do something about it. And that completes chapter 8. Alright guys, this is another time for everybody to go and use the bathroom, get a drink or some kind of food, I'll give it a minute or two, and then we'll continue to the last chapter that I will be reading today, which it looks to be, we're on chapter 9 of the series right now. I'm gonna fix up my throat real quick. So I'll try and fix this chat box too. There we go. Alright. I think I got my throat cleared up. So we're going to continue with the last chapter for today. Also, I would like to point out I will be uploading these VODs onto YouTube. So, if you guys ever want to catch up with the story, you'll be able to watch the videos there. I'll also make a dedicated playlist for just the ASMR book readings, so it's easier for you guys to locate them. So we're going to continue to chapter 9, called On the Riverbank. Back at the cottage, I went to the room where the spook kept his walking clothes. I chose one of his little clothes. It was too big, of course, and the hem came down almost to my ankles, while the hood kept falling down over my eyes. Still, it would keep out the worst of the cold. I borrowed one of his staffs too, the one most useful to me as a walking stick. It was shorter than the others and slightly thicker at one end. When I finally left the cottage, it was close to midnight. The sky was bright, and there was a full moon just rising above the trees, but I could smell rain, and the wind was freshening from the west. I walked out into the garden and headed directly for Mother Malkin's pit. I was afraid, but someone had to do it, and who else was there but me? It was all my fault anyway. If only I told the spook about meeting Alice and what she told the lads about Lizzie being back. He could have sorted it all out then. He wouldn't have been lured away to Pendle. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. The child on the Long Ridge might not have died. I felt guilty, so guilty. I couldn't stand the thought that another child might die, and that it would be my fault too. I passed the second grave where the dead witch was buried. head down, moved very slowly forward on my own tiptoes until I reached the pit. A shaft of moonlight fell through the trees to light it up, so there was no doubt about what had happened. I was too late. The bars had been bent even farther apart, almost into the shape of a circle. Even the butcher couldn't have eased his massive shoulders through the gap. I peered down into the blackness of the pit, but couldn't see anything. I suppose I had a forlorn hope that she might have exhausted herself. Bending the bars was now too tired to climb out. Fat chance. At that moment, a cloud drifted across the moon, making things a lot darker. But I could see the bent ferns. I could see the direction she'd taken. There was enough light to follow her trail, so I followed her into the gloom. I wasn't moving too quickly, and I wasn't being very, very cautious. What if she was hiding and waiting for me just ahead? I also knew that she probably had gotten very far. For one thing, it wasn't more than 5 minutes or so after midnight. Whatever was in the cake she'd eaten, I knew that dark magic would have played some part in getting her strength back. It was a magic that was supposed to be more powerful during the hours of darkness, particularly at midnight. She had only eaten 2 cakes, not 3, so that was in my favor. But I thought of the terrible strength needed to bend those bars. Once out of the trees, I found it easy to follow her trail, through the grass. She was heading downhill, but in the direction that would take her away from Boney Lizzie's cottage. That puzzled me at first, until I remembered the river and the gully below. The malevolent witch couldn't cross running water. The spook had taught me that. So she would have to move along its banks until it curved back upon itself, leaving her way clear. Once in sight of the river, I paused on the hillside and searched the land below. The moon came out from behind the cloud, but at first, even with its help, I couldn't see anything much down by the river because there were trees on both banks casting dark shadows. And then suddenly, I noticed something very strange. There was a silver trail on the near bank. It was only visible where the moon touched it, but it looked just like the glistening trail made by a snail. A few seconds later, I saw a dark, shadowy thing, all hunched up, shuffling along very close to the riverbank. I started off down the hill as quickly as I could. My intention was to cut her off before she reached the bend in the river and was able to head directly for Boney Lizzie's place. I managed that and stood there, the river on my right facing downstream. But next came the difficult part. Now I had to face the witch. I was trembling and shaking and so out of breath that you'd have thought I'd spent an hour or so running up and down the hill. It was a mixture of fear and nerves, and my knees felt as if they were going to give way any minute. It was only by leaning heavily on the spook's staff that I was able to stay on my feet at all. As rivers went, it wasn't that wide, but it was deep, swollen by the spring rains to a level where it had almost burst its banks. The water was moving fast, too rushing, away from me in the darkness beneath the trees where the witch was. I looked very carefully, but it still took me quite a few moments to find her. Mother Malcolm was moving in my direction. She was a shadow darker than the tree shadows, a sort of blackness that you could fall into, a darkness that would swallow you up forever. I heard her then, even above the noise made by the first fast-flowing river. It wasn't just the sound of her bare feet, which were making a sort of slithering noise as they moved toward me through the long grass at the stream's edge. No, there were other sounds that she was making with her mouth and perhaps her nose. The same sort of noises she made when I fed her the cake. There were snortings and snufflings that once again brought into my mind the memory of our hairy pigs feeding from the swill bucket. Then a different sound, a sucking sound. When she moved out from under the trees into the open, the moonlight fell on her, and I saw her properly for the first time. Her head was bowed low, her face hidden by a tangled mass of white and gray hair, so it seemed that she was looking at her feet, which were just visible under the dark gown that came down to her ankles. She wore a black cloak too, and either it was too long for her or the years that she had spent in the damp earth had made her shrink. It hung down to the ground behind her, and it was this, dragging over the grass, that seemed to be making the silver trail. Her gown was stained and torn, which wasn't really surprising, but some were fresh stains, dark, wet patches. Something was dripping onto the grass at her side, and the drips were coming from what she gripped tightly in her left hand. It was a rat. She was eating a rat, eating it raw. It didn't seem to have noticed me yet. She was very close now, and even if nothing happened, she'd bump right into me. I coughed suddenly. It wasn't to warn her. It was a nervous cough, and I hadn't meant it to happen. She looked up at me then, lifting into the moonlight a face that was something out of a nightmare. A face that didn't belong to a living person. Oh, but she was alive all right. You could tell that by the noises she was making eating the rat. But there was something else about her that terrified me so much that I almost fainted away on the spot. It was her eyes. They were like two hot coals burning inside their sockets, two red points of fire. And then she spoke to me, her voice something between a whisper and a croak. It sounded like dry, dead leaves rustling together in a late autumn wind. "It's a boy," she said. "I like boys. Come here, boy." I didn't move. Of course. I just stood there, rooted to the spot. I felt dizzy and lightheaded. She was still moving toward me, and her eyes seemed to be growing larger. Not only her eyes, her whole body seemed to be swelling up. She was expanding into a vast cloud of darkness that within moments would darken my own eyes forever. Without thinking, I lifted the spook's staff. My hands and arms did it, not me. "What's that, boy? A wand?" she croaked. Then she chuckled to herself and dropped the dead rat, lifting both her arms toward me. It was me she wanted. She wanted my blood. In absolute terror, my body began to sway from side to side. It was like a sapling agitated by the first stirring of a wind, the first storm wind of dark winter that would never end. I could have died then, on that bank of that river. There was nobody to help, and I felt powerless to help myself. But suddenly, it happened. The spook's staff wasn't a wand, but there's more than one kind of magic. My arms conjured up something special, moving faster than I could even think. They lifted the staff and swung it hard, catching the witch a terrible blow on the side of the head. She gave a sort of a grunt and fell sideways into the river. There was a big splash, and she went right under, but came up very close to the bank, about 5 or 6 paces downstream. At first, I thought that was the end of her, but to my horror, her left arm came out of the water and grabbed a tussock of grass. Then the other arm reached for the bank, and she started to drag herself out of the water. I knew I had to do something before it was too late, so using all my willpower, I forced myself to take a step toward her as she heaved more of her body up onto the bank. When I got close enough, I did something I could still remember vividly. I still have nightmares about it, but what choice did I have? It was her or me. Only one of us was going to survive. I jabbed the witch with the end of my staff. I jabbed her so hard I kept on jabbing her until she finally lost her grip on the bank and was swept away into the darkness. But it still wasn't over. What if she managed to get out of the water farther downstream? She could still go to Boney Lizzie's house. I had to make sure that didn't happen. I knew it was the wrong thing to kill her, and that one day she'd probably come back stronger than ever. But I didn't have a silver chain, so I couldn't bind her. It was now that mattered, not the future. No matter how hard it was, I knew I had to follow the river into the trees. Very slowly I began to walk along the riverbank, pausing every 5 or 6 steps to listen. All I could hear was the wind sighing faintly through the branches above. It was very dark, with only the occasional thin shaft of moonlight managing to penetrate the leaf canopy, each like a long silver spear embedded in the ground. The third time I paused, it happened. There was no warning. I didn't hear a thing. I simply felt it. A hand slithered up onto my boot, and before I could move away, it gripped my left ankle hard. I felt the strength in that grip. It was as if my ankles were being crushed. When I looked down, all I could see was a pair of red eyes glaring up at me out of the darkness. Terrified, I jabbed down blindly toward the unseen hand that was clutching my ankle. I was too late. My ankle was jerked violently and I fell to the ground, the impact driving all the breath from my body. What was worse, the staff went flying from my hand, leaving me defenseless. I lay there for a moment or two, trying to catch my breath until I felt myself being dragged toward the riverbank. When I heard the splashing, I knew what was happening. Mother Malcolm was using me to drag herself out of the river. The witch's legs were thrashing about in the water, and I knew that one of two things would happen. Either she managed to get out, or I'd end up in the river with her. Desperate to escape, I rolled over to my left, twisting my ankle away. She held on, so I rolled again and came to a halt with my face pressed against the damp earth. Then I saw the staff, its thicker end lying in the shaft of moonlight. It was out of reach about 3 or 4 paces away. I rolled toward it, rolled again and again, digging my fingers into the soft earth, twisting my body like a corkscrew. Mother Malcolm had a tight grip on my ankle, but that was all she had. The lower half of her body was still in the water, so despite her great strength, she couldn't stop me from rolling over and twisting her through the water after me. At last I reached the staff and thrust it hard at the witch, but her own hand moved into the moonlight and gripped the other end. I thought it was over then. I thought that was the end of me, but to my surprise, Mother Malcolm suddenly screamed very loudly. Her whole body became rigid, and her eyes rolled up in her head. Then she gave a long, deep sigh and became very still. We both lay there on the riverbank for what seemed a long time. Only my chest was rising and falling as I gulped in air. Mother Malcolm wasn't moving at all, when finally she did. It wasn't to take a breath. Very slowly, one hand let go of my ankle, and the other released the staff, and she slid down the bank into the river, entering the water with hardly a splash. I didn't know what had happened, but she was dead. I was sure of it. I watched her body being carried away from the bank by the current and swirled right into the middle of the river. Still lit by the moon, her head went under. She was gone. Dead and gone. And that completes chapter 9. Alright guys, we have read 3 chapters today. And as I said, I will go ahead and prepare the first VOD of the book ASMR for YouTube. So that way, if some of you are really liking the book series and are interested in hearing the story from the beginning in the first VOD, I will have it on YouTube soon enough. And then I will also be uploading this one for those who haven't caught up with the second part of this book reading ASMR, so you guys can keep up with the story going on. Another announcement, every Monday will be book reading ASMR now, especially when I get done after work and I need to do schoolwork whenever I do get home. So when I do get home, I'll do some reading and then I'll be uploading the VODs because I need to also take care of my school stuff. But thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this book reading session and the continued story of The Last Apprentice. I hope everybody has a good sleep, a good night, or a good morning for others that live in different countries. And y'all sleep well. Have a good one. Goodbye, y'all.